Well, hello, Patrick. I hope you're doing good today. Let's continue reading, shall we, Patrick? I felt things, I've done things, he burst out, in my life, which have put me. He drew his hand away from the arms of her big chair and leaned back, making the inlaid woodwork of the delicate piece of carpentry he sat on creak ominously. Put me outside the pale. Then, thrusting his hands deep in his pockets, he gave vent to two unpleasant emissions of sound, which he meant to be a cynical laugh. Canst thou not minister to a mind deceased, Cordelia? The girl responded, it was a sign of more devotion than he realized, by slipping off her new jacket and struggling to pull off her new gloves. I am sorry, Owen, she murmured. The way she said Owen tickled the fancy of Mr. Evans, and he smiled at her grimly. I know you are, my dear, he said. I would have told you about this 2 weeks ago, if I could. There's no earthly reason why I shouldn't tell you everything, except that I can't. I am sorry, Owen, she repeated, folding back with frowning intensity the second of the two gloves and finally pulling it off and laying it on the chair by her side. Why I should have ever been born like I am, said Mr. Evans, is what I can't understand. But that's what the worst men who have ever lived might have said. He got up from his seat and began walking up and down the small space at the end of the shop. Every time he swung around, he looked at the handle of the door leading to the room below. How often had he struggled against the irresistible temptation to turn that handle to steal a few feverish moments of reading from that book. Cordelia, do you think there are forms of evil so horrible that nothing can wash them out? The girl was sitting sideways now on her dusky, gilded throne. A long, quivering stream of reddish sunlight fell upon her full profile and gave to all the eccentricities an emphasis that was startling. Wash them out? She said stupidly. I mean, do you think there are certain things anyone can do, cruel, abominable things, which bring in their train undying remorse? Listen, Cordelia, do you think when Christ sweated that bloody sweat it talks about, he felt the weight of things like that? Not what he'd done himself, of course, but what, before he died, he had to take on himself? Shall I tell you something, Cordy? I can tell you that much, anyway. John Crow has asked me to play the Christ in your father's pageant, and I said I would if he'd let me be really tied to a cross. You can see why I said that, Cordelia, can't you? It'll be hard to bear. He emitted these same unpleasant guttural sounds again that he evidently supposed resembled a brutal guffaw. It'll probably be more painful than I've had any idea of, but I thought I'd realize it that way, how he really did take such things on him. It has been terrible for you, Owen, all this that you have gone through, she said, but I can't believe that there are many things so awful that Christ cannot pardon them. He stopped in his walk and faced her, his hands still deep in his pockets. People don't seem to realize, he said, what evil is. They don't seem to realize how far it goes down. It has holes that go down, beyond the mind, beyond the reason, beyond all we can think of. Something comes up from these holes and it gives you power when you're in certain moods. And it's then you feel these things and do things. His voice rose here to such a pitch the girl started up and made a movement of her hand towards him, which nothing in nature can forgive. He moved backward, away from her now with a lunching motion, until his shoulder struck against a tall walnut-wood bureau. The shock of this seemed to calm him a little bit. Of course, he murmured, turning his back to her and pausing, passing his fingers up and down along the bureau's edge. Christ is outside nature, and that's my chance. He's outside, isn't he, Cordelia? Outside altogether. Cordelia did somehow find the courage now to move up close to him and lay a nervous hand on the sleeve of his coat. He started at her touch, and the expression on his face frightened her. But he must have pressed at once in the dark machinery of his mind one of those iron engines of his morbidity active will, and it was with quite courtly gesture that he raised his hands to his lips. "You're sweeter to me than I deserve, my dear," he said, gently. "I wish indeed, for your sake, I were a very different person." "I am quite happy with you as you are, Owen," whispered Cordelia with a beating heart. "Oh, why," she cried in all her nerves, "oh, why doesn't he take me in his arms?" Next scene. While these events were occurring in Number Two's shop, Number Two himself, namely Mr. Bartholomew Jones, already a little recovered from the extraction of what Penny Pitches called a cysty in his lower regions, was out of the hospital for a morning drive. One of the doctors had offered to take the old man with him on a trip to Godney, but had dropped him off instead for an hour's visit to the house of his aged crony, Abel Twig. Here at the door of the latter's woodshed, the two old gentlemen were exchanging comments upon life, just as they had been accustomed to for the last 50 years. "Me granddaughter, Sally, do din me ears with talk about our new mayor. The gal gives himself as much airs as if she were a she-mayor. And yet 'tis only because of her being they're made of all. 'Tis wondrous able how these pretty kids do take on about public doings. In these old days, brother, 'twas upon pasties and apple turnovers and such like that their minds rind." "Fill up thee pipe, Bart, fill up thee pipe, and think no more of de pitiful going on," said Mr. Twig firmly. "'Tis thoughts such as these, thoughts which bring poor buggers like me and we into hospitals and infirmaries. When sun do shine and birds do sing, 'tis best to stretch our legs, brother, and hummy the drummy. But isn't only a thick new mare that my great daughter talks to of. 'Tis of sad, wicked, fleshy doings, which would bring some girl folk into trouble if all were known." The two old herds moved closer to one another now, and the two old caked and crusted briar pipes were tapped simultaneously on Abel Twig's wood-chopping stump. "But then the fleshy doings of them want that be mayors, or they of them ain't mayors?" inquired Number One evasively. "'Tis Sally Jones what says so, Abby, not us, these knows," murmured Number Two, casting a weary eye up the road and down the road. "But she tells I that think little gals would play with our Jackie be an illegit of Mr. Crow up in Elms. She do say there were hintings and blinkings in the Gazette about thick little Jub. 'Twere at last Wednesday's number of thereabout, she said, and she here reckons 'twas Red Robinson would put uns there." Two matches were simultaneously held, two charred and blackened orifices, and two thick clouds of blue smoke erupted from beneath a blue bird-like nose and a dog-like nose. "Our midsummer day, fair partner, be making this nation ring and ting, so I hears," said Abel Twig. "So it be, brother, so it be," said the other. "For me one parts, I've never been one for they roundabouts and they maypole junkerings and they Aunt Sally throws and the spotted men and pink-headed woman. I were born over modest, the head doctor at hospital told Nurse Robinson, which were a way of saying that me stomach be easy turned. Thick head doctor be all for they spick and span inventions, you know, and I do seem to be an old-fangled man, what were better in grave." "Don't 'ee say such words, Brother Bart," protested Mr. Twig hurriedly. "Don't 'ee say 'em. You'll be stretching these legs in me woodshed the pretty springtime come 7 years away, when head doctor be turned to middle dust." "But isn't only of cockshies and merry-go-rounds and fat men and cannibals that Mary Geard be thinking," went on the other. "Thick young John Crow, what he brought over from France, be teaching all the lads and gals of our town to act in a play that'll show God the Father, God the Son, and God the Holy Ghost, walking and talking like common men. 'Tis bloody blasphemy, most folks say. Others say 'tis true religion brought back to earth. I do shiver and shake sometimes o' nights in the hospital, Abby, when I do think of what be in the air, and what be in the future for this wood town, and for what me and these would become. He's always been a nervous man of yours, heart, Bart, said Abel Twig consolingly, laying his scrawny fist upon the real Sunday trousers of his friend. The neat trousers, from which emanated the extreme full, musty smell of a ready-made man's counter of the days of Mr. Wallop's father. But there be nothing in thick midsummer's fare to worry we. Number 2 shook his head. He assumed the haughty and melancholy air of a famous pathological case, about whose bed's head the greatest doctors in Europe had disputed for years in vain. I be afeard of what the future will bring to our world town, Abby, he said. There do come to I of nights the shaky shivers, as you might say, when as I lies awake in thick-girt white word, where through they could windies be blowing every dot of heaven. And I do hear thy ghosties come out of thy ruins, brother, and do go wah, wah, wush, over all the roofs, and I feel for sure that some girt change be coming over the town. These talks be silly talk, brother, said Mr. Twig. What do you mean by a girt change? I do mean what the planks and the stones in the town do feel in their wet innards, when night be over day, and all be sleeping. I do mean the shivvy shakies of the wood postings and windies and chimbeys and rafties, when dark be on 'em. Say what you will, brother Abbey, say what you will. 'Tis the nature of stones and timber to know what changes to be coming upon the earth. 'Tis the same with thy dumb beasties afore in a store. They knows, for they be a farmer, how it be with these slugs and snails what train be coming. And yet mortal men, brother, see not of it. 'Tis hid from un. It's hid from these women too, though sometimes 'tis true that one of they will talk terrible wise, if so be a man had the patience to listen. Abel Twig shifted his position a little, to ease himself from the hardness of the wood bench he sat upon, for being a man of singularity, lean flanks, his bones were unprotected. Had he ever known a day, Brother Bart, when there hear proselytizings of rafties and chimblies and wood church roofs, whate'er do here in hospital, have brought summit to pass that a man could name, some in the newspapers and history books could mention, some in that girt noblemen like the Lord P could loosey and dozy over, as they sip their cellar wine after the blackcock pasties? Number 2 contorted his countenance into a hideous caricature of humanity, in the sheer effort of ransacking his memory. Then the outlines of his face relaxed and a tremendous smile curled his lips. So I do, Abby, so I do, he murmured complacently. I recollect clear as daylight now, when there was the 3 bad harvesting season, yes, and whole factories closed down. They were high-dye works then, what now be crows, and many sons of bitches were nigh to starving in those days, and victuals were so scarce that even the rich tradesmen could scarce afford sauce to do their meats. And these terrible starving times was prophesied, just as I be telling ye now, by creakings and groanings in the rolled stones of thy ruins. Something be coming upon our town, Abby, sure as my poor side be suffering from head doctor's whimsies. 'Tis coming, brother, don't ye make no mistake. 'Tis coming. And all these changes of mayors and proclaimings of fairs be the outward signs, as Catholicism do say, of some holy terror. It may be pestilence and it may be famine, I'm not saying it will be shortage of bread and the burying of human skeletons, but I'm not saying it won't be these things, but something it will be, for the moanings and groanings of thy ruins be getting worse and worse. They keep a person awake, brother. Not but what I sleep well in hospital when I do sleep. Don't let nothing of that to head Dr. Abbey, but 'tis when I don't sleep that they proselytizing do bring death and judgment to me what is. Dun, dun, dun. Bad omens ahead in Glastonbury. But hey, probably better off there than here right now, right? Well, until next time, see you later.